Carol, how many earthquakes have they had in Youngstown, Ohio since, let's see, I think the article I read said the 18th century. How many earthquakes?
1.
0. She said 1. That was pretty close. They've had no recorded earthquakes. Now, maybe people felt them in the days of the Pony Express, and what can you do? You're not going to, tweet that. But there, in recorded history in Youngstown, there have been no minor or major earthquakes. Carol, since they started injecting this wastewater. They inject the water into the Pennsylvania natural gas fields, crack up all the shale there, or the rock there, and then pull out the natural gas, have all this junky wastewater. What are they doing? They're sending it across the border into Ohio, where they are injecting it into 9,000 feet, 9,200 feet deep wells. Carol, that's our solution to the wastewater. Now, they started doing this about a year ago, Carol. Well, actually, I'm not sure exactly when they started it, but about a year ago, Carol, guess what started happening around those wells near Youngstown, Ohio? You know how many earthquakes they've had in Youngstown, Ohio since March? That's the last, 10 months? You know how many earthquakes they've had in Youngstown, Ohio? 11. 11 earthquakes. They had one, before this weekend, the biggest one was a 2.7. And Carol, 2.7, bring it. That's what you say to a 2.7. Not too loud, though, because the next one was a 4. They stopped after the 2.7 last Friday, or after the 2.7, they ordered the company last Friday to stop injecting water in, right? Now, the gas companies are able to say, well, those earthquakes, we don't know for sure whether it's related, and that's how science is. The lawyers can always get off because science does the best it can with the evidence at hand. It can notice correlations. There's a lot of earthquakes. We started injecting all this wastewater from the fracking into this area. We think it's connected. And there hadn't been any earthquakes before we started doing that. After we started doing it, we've had 11 earthquakes in 10 months. But a lawyer can be like, well, can you be sure? Can you prove that that's what's doing it? And a scientist is like, no, that's not how science works 9 times out of 10, certainly not without more data. So we need more data. There should be a nationwide moratorium on any new fracking until we get good data. That means you have to pay money and insert seismographs, which they actually did in Youngstown, Ohio, before the latest couple, right? They actually got, geologists, seismologists, people that study earthquakes, to actually say, okay, gas companies, you're saying we don't know for sure, it could come from anywhere. Let's put seismographs all around the wells and see where the depths are coming from, and then we can look at the data the next earthquake that happens. And sure enough, the last 2 earthquakes. Oh, by the way, when they stopped drilling last Friday, or pouring the wastewater into this well last Friday, the next earthquake, Carol, happened the following day. Right? What the idea is that there's this bedrock with all these fractures and faults that have settled over the years. Makes sense? Millions and millions of years. No, even if there are faults everywhere, and there really are faults everywhere in the bedrock crust. I mean, we don't know, we haven't mapped it carefully, right? And they don't. There's no requirement. The EPA has no seismological requirement at all for fracking. At all. Because it's too new. We haven't had a chance to let the laws catch up. And now here's the North Carolina legislature rushing. You can just smell the money in their hand. They can smell the money, Oh, in the air, this is great, and we're just going to go get it. They're rushing to do it. We've had no data. When they put the data, the seismographs in over the past couple weeks and checked the last 2 earthquakes, guess what, Carol? They came from exactly the same spot along those wells. They had a 4.0 earthquake in Youngstown, Ohio, this past Saturday. Did you hear about this? All right. Here's my point. There are a number of reasons to go slow here. Honestly, I think that it's going to happen in North Carolina. They're just going to rubber stamp a law. What we need to do is make sure that there are enough Regulations is the word, John Locke Foundation. You listening, John Hood? You really going to just say, yeah, there's no government regulation that needs to happen with fracking? All I'm saying is we need monitoring on all of these places where this is happening. We need to be able to get data. Now, the gas companies don't want this because the data is going to show that this is a new technology that's got lots of unforeseen dangers. Actually, I think they know that they're responsible. I think that ultimately, Carol, what we're going to come to, if the John Locke Foundations of the world have their way, is we're going to, I'm sorry I keep going after you guys, but you really are this knee-jerk anti-regulation thing. This is a classic case where we need science and regulation to if we're going to do fracking, and it looks like we are, because the money's too, people are greedy, and the money's too good. If we're going to do it, this is a classic case where measured regulation will help minimize the costs. It's just smart from an economic standpoint, but not if all you're thinking about is your own short-term greed or some kind of knee-jerk, no regulations kind of response. Sorry, that's just the way I feel. The number's 9966775. So what happens is over the centuries, the bedrock and all those cracks reach some kind of equilibrium. All that weight, the cracks just kind of settle. And then you inject high-pressure wastewater from the other fracking operation in the state next door just to get rid of it. They're just pumping the crap in there just so you don't see it anymore. That never works. Does that ever work? That never works. Ignoring stuff never works. Trust me, Carol, I've tried it with bills. It doesn't work. Why doesn't ignoring a problem work? Damn it! It's kind of, it feels good at the time. I have a serious problem with ignoring problems. I wish I could stop ignoring my ignoring problems problem. That's the problem I need to stop ignoring. So, where was I? Oh yeah, so they pump in this water under high pressures to just get rid of it. And what happens is that equilibrium with all those faults that aren't going anywhere because they've had centuries to settle, suddenly start shifting. And suddenly you start getting these tremors. This is the theory. It's the best theory we've got right now. As to why all of a sudden, after hundreds of years of no earthquakes in Youngstown, Ohio, we've seen 11, a 4.0 this past Saturday in the same spot that a week before had a 2.7, I think. They're getting stronger. Is this alarmist? Well, are you telling me there weren't earthquakes in Youngstown, Ohio last weekend? I mean, really? This is, me, Carol, if we're just talking common sense, it's a no-brainer. Both the initial fracking operations are going to cause earthquakes because there's no stopping them. They can do whatever they want. There's no regulation on this stuff. There's no regulation on the chemicals. There's no requirement that drinking water wells and drinking water supplies nearby have careful monitoring of chemicals in them intact. There's none of that required in the law. And if it's not required in the law, no one at the gas company is going to spend any money to do it until it gets required in the law. Now, can we look at the Republican legislature and say, all we're asking, because we know you're going to rubber stamp this, and it's too much to ask Bev Perdue to go up against gas company money in an election year, so I'm guessing she would not veto it. A fracking bill. All I'm saying, a pro-fracking bill. All I'm saying is, can we ask the Republican legislature of North Carolina to say, let's put some monitoring requirements, some groundwater monitoring requirements, some seismological monitoring requirements. Let's not just let them do whatever they want for 10 years until we've got contaminated groundwater, because that's what will happen. We're seeing it over and over and over again. And right now, the gas company's big defense is we don't know for sure that those contaminants are coming from us. We don't know for sure that the earthquakes are being caused by us. So they're going to fight a requirement for monitoring because we will find out for sure. We have to push back on that. Anyway, okay, leave aside the leases and the contracts that the gas companies are handing people who don't have legal backgrounds but just like the idea of an upfront bonus. Remember, we've seen case after case in Arkansas, in Pennsylvania, all over, case after case of the gas companies handing relatively uninformed. I'm not saying people are stupid. I'm just saying they let money get in the way, or they believe, or they're trusting. They believe the gas company people. A lot of times they don't even have the underground mineral rights to the land that they own. That's separate a lot of times. And so they're on the hook for the cleanup a lot of times. The gas companies are actually giving these trusting, not very well educated in the ways of lawyers, people, these contracts that keep them on the hook. They let the gas companies off the hook and put the landowner on the hook for all cleanup costs. I swear to God, that's what they've been doing this in some cases. What kind of evil person does that? Well, an evil person with a lawyer who says, yeah, do that. Let's see if we can get rid of that. They signed it, we're golden. So we need some protections in the law against certain kinds of practices. Specifically, we need to specifically ban certain kinds of practices from the contracts that are being offered. Or say, if to the gas companies, if you want these licenses to do fracking, then you need to obey the following rules when you hand the contract to a landowner. You're responsible for the cleanup. You can't sign that over to the landowner. Somebody needs to make sure where the mineral rights are before any money changes hands. You know, things that can't, in other words, the Republican legislature of North Carolina needs to be protecting the citizens of North Carolina from corporations whose main interest is their own bottom line. Now, I know business is not necessarily bad, and businesses, drive, give people jobs and drive the economy. And I'm not anti-business, but I am anti-rapacious business that screws over, I almost said the F word, Carol, that screws over people who don't have lawyers around so that they can be more rapacious. Look it up, kids. It means greedy. It means rapacious, like everything. Rapacious. So I think we need to have certain specific rules for the contracts that these companies are allowed to hand over to people. Or there needs to be some kind of process or a central place that looks at the contracts. Now, I know a lot of libertarians would be like, oh, how dare you interfere with the contracts? I know, and I don't think the government should be in marriage contracts either, and everybody should be able to do a contract with any other adult, consenting adult they like. I mean, I understand that, but in this case, when it comes to the environment, I'm sorry, I just hit this wall. I really hit this wall because I've seen what's happened over the last 20, 30 years. It's not excessive regulation that is causing these earthquakes in Youngstown, Ohio. Just a requirement that monitoring of groundwater and seismological monitoring be near any of these wells or any of the places where they inject wastewater. Does anybody object to that? Let's start with that, right? The gas companies will object to that. Again, they don't want the proof. They don't want science to be able to come close to say, based on everything we know in our scientific toolkit, that's what's causing these earthquakes. The evidence is overwhelming. They don't want that.